I'm attorney Ann David from Wilmington, North Carolina, and I'm joining you today to read a great book about a man who's one of our founding fathers and who invented so many interesting things that we still use today, including a really fun puzzle that all of you may have tried at some time. The name of the book is Benjamin Franklin and the Magic Squares. This book was written by Frank Murphy and illustrated by Richard Waltz. To start off with the book, we'll learn a little bit about Benjamin Franklin, and then we'll figure out what the magic squares are. Over 200 years ago, when America was just 13 colonies, which was like states, there was a super smart guy by the name of Benjamin Franklin. Most of his friends just called him Ben. This story is about how Ben invented the magic squares. But first, there's some things you need to know about Ben before we learn about the magic squares. Benjamin Franklin wasn't smart for nothing. He had a brain and he put it to good use. He was always thinking and writing and inventing lots of cool things, even when he was a kid. When he was 11 years old, Ben jumped into the lake, holding on to a kite. The kite pulled by the wind and pulled Ben all over the lake. The kite flew a whole mile with Ben holding on tight. That same year, Ben wanted to swim faster than anyone in the lake, so he invented flippers for his hands and his feet. They worked, and they're still used today. But a lot of you have used flippers. See? Here are the flippers. And there's him pulling with a kite. As Ben grew older, he kept thinking and writing and inventing. When he was 23 years old, he wrote and printed a newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette. People loved it. So when he was 26, he wrote and printed a book called Poor Richard's Almanac. An almanac is a book of useful information, weather predictions, advertisements, and even a printing of dates that are really important to remember. But Ben's almanac had even more things in them. He had witty sayings that were really clever and funny, along with a lot of fun puzzles. A lot of the sayings he included in his almanac, I bet all of you have heard of today, like an apple a day keeps the doctor away, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, and never put off tomorrow what you can do today, or lost time is never found again. One of the funniest ones are, a fish and visitors stink after 3 days. When when he was 36, he invented a special stove. Back then, they didn't have electricity yet, so they were cooking on a fireplace. But this stove he invented kept homes warmer than any fire in a fireplace and burned less wood. Everyone was so amazed, and they still use Franklin stoves today. See, that's the stove right there. And they would cook on top of it. Ben never outgrew his love of kites, too. When he was 46, he decided to tie a key to a string of a kite. And then, I bet all of you know this story, he went out into a thunderstorm to fly the kite. This was not a very safe thing to do, but Ben did find out that lightning was made of electricity. And you know we all use electricity today. Ben also invented some things that we may never have heard of. He invented a rocking chair that had a fan on the top. And when Ben would rock back and forth, the fan swished this way and that way, and it would swish the flies from over his head. Not many people heard of this invention or used it since, but there it is, see? It would swish back and forth. He loved to invent things that were helpful to people. some of the most important things that Ben invented that we use every day. Over the years, he started America's first library, as well as the first fire department and America's first hospital. That's an old fire engine. They used to pull them by a horse, or gentlemen would just pull them, two guys would pull them down the street. He even helped Thomas Jefferson write and rewrite many times until they came up with the final draft of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. So I know you now realize that Benjamin Franklin is really a super smart guy, right? All right, so we're ready to talk about the story of the magic squares. It all started in the middle of Ben's life in 1736. That year, he became the clerk of the Pennsylvania Colonial Assembly. And that's just like our state legislature. And the assembly is a group of men that make the laws for that colony, the colony of Pennsylvania. That's just like, Pennsylvania is just like a state like North Carolina. A clerk is someone that writes down all the information as the legislators talk, so they can keep up with what they're talking about. And so the guys at the assembly chose Ben to be their clerk because he was a super smart guy and a great writer. Ben listened carefully to the men at the assembly. He couldn't write anything down until they had made a final decision. So Ben waited and waited, and for days he listened to long arguments about which laws were good and which laws were bad. For even more days he listened to fights about taxes and bills. And for even more days Ben listened to disagreements about numbers and money and city streets and state laws, until one day, you see him? He's so disgusted. So one day, he fell asleep, conked out. All the congressmen are looking at him and pointing and going, they're disgusted. The members of the assembly were not happy. "Mr. Franklin," one of them yelled loudly. Ben woke up and he was very embarrassed. "I am so sorry." Everyone went back to work and the men started arguing again. Ben listened and listened. He kept his ears open and his eyes open, and it was very hard because it was very boring to him. The day turned into night and the assemblymen still argued. Ben found out that it was much easier to stay awake if his hands were busy. So he twiddled his thumbs. He tickled his nose with the quill pen. He dipped his pen in the ink and started to doodle. I bet many of you start to doodle sometimes, just to draw and have a good time. He doodled people. He doodled new inventions. And he even doodled his pet squirrel, Skug. The men of the assembly were still arguing, so Ben decided to doodle a math puzzle. He loved math puzzles. He drew a square and then drew 2 lines up and down and 2 lines left to right. He made 9 boxes in one big box, and he wrote different numbers in each box. He stared at the numbers and waited for an idea to pop in his head. Okay. All right. Ben noticed something. When he added the numbers in the first row, they equaled 15. Then he added the numbers in the first column, and they equaled 15 as well. Now Ben wondered if he could make the numbers add up to 15 no matter which row or column that he picked. What if even they added up on the diagonals to be 15? That would be more than a magic puzzle. That would be more than a math puzzle. It would be a magic square math puzzle. So Ben started rearranging the numbers, sorting the numbers, and rearranging the numbers again. Ben was thinking so hard about the magic square that he was not sleepy at all. So finally he saw what needed to be done. He wrote a 1 in the center box. Then he wrote a 2 in the last box on the third row. And then he wrote a 3 in the first box on the third row. Then he wrote a 4 in the bottom box of the first column. He wrote a 5 in the box of the center and a 6 in the third box on the first row. And under the 6, he wrote a 7. And then he wrote an 8 in the first box on the top row. And finally, he wrote a 9 in the only box left. But was it the magic square? He started adding. He added row and column, and everything came up to 15. And finally, the diagonals, they even came up to 15. Got it all done. And then he jumped up in the middle of the assembly and he said, "It's a magical magic!" Ben shouted. He had created the magic square. After that, Ben never dozed off at the assembly again. Instead, he doodled magic squares until either the assemblyman finally made a decision or he gave them some decisions of his own, like encouraging that they put street lights so people could see at night. Ben went on to publish many magic squares in his newspapers and his almanac. People just loved figuring out the answers to the magic numbers, as they still do today. Now, let's go over how to make your own magic square, okay? First, you have to draw the box, okay? These are the directions. Draw the box here, okay? And then, like Ben, put the 1, and then you put the 2. All right. There's a 3 here. And then the 4 goes below the 3. I'm going to put the 5 in the middle. And then there's Ben. He's finished out everything. So add those to your boxes so you'll complete them. And you'll have your very own magic square that you can get people to try and be amazed about. So now you see that's how Benjamin Franklin created the magic square. He was not only a great inventor and a great writer and a great leader and founding father to our country, he also created the magic squares. Thanks for letting me read to you, and I hope you learned a little bit. And remember, American history is lots of fun, and they're people just like you and I, and they become leaders of our country, just like you can. So always try to figure out a way to help your next door neighbor or your friends or your teachers, because one day you may be the leaders of our country. Thank you so much, and take care.